welcome. This is Amhara Media Corporation and you're watching our Monday update live from Bahar Dar, Ethiopia. And I am Fikrat Dizodu. Stay with us. According to Government Communications Service, citizens living in areas occupied by the terrorist group TPLF are organizing and liberating themselves through hard struggle. Rahan Wargana will give us the detail.
The government has also called on the people to consolidate the measures they have been taking against the terrorist group by organizing themselves. Briefing the media, Government Communications Service Minister Laggasa Tulu said the terrorist TPLF group has been committing outrageous crimes against citizens in occupied areas. According to him, the criminal group has massacred innocent civilians, looted properties, and destroyed what it could not take away. He added that citizens have been taking measures against the terrorist group by organizing themselves. The minister commended the heroic deeds of citizens who liberated their localities and their country.
ኢሰብአዊ ኢኮኖሚያዊና ስነ-ልቦናዊ ሁኔታዎች ጫናው የበረታበት በመምጣቱ ምክንያት
In places where the terrorist TPLF invaded, the group is committing inhuman acts, bringing economic crisis and psychological impact on the community. As a result, the people are organizing themselves and fighting the terrorist TPLF clique. Most of the areas are liberated from the group, and the people are also trying to liberate other places. The federal government of Ethiopia is strongly appreciating the commitment of the people in fighting the terrorist TPLF to liberate the places occupied by the group.
ከወራሪ ለማጽዳት የሚያደርገውን እንቅስቃሴ በእጅጉ አኩሪ ተግባር ነው ብሎ ያያል።
In related news, many members of the terrorist group Shene, which is operating in Oromia region, were captured and others eliminated in a coordinated attack carried out during the past days. The minister further said that the support of the people of Oromia for the joint operations of the National Defense Force, Oromia Special Force and Militia against Shene group is immense. He stated that the Oromo people have demonstrated that terrorist TPLF cannot come back to power using Shene group as a stooge.
በኦሮሚያ ክልል ሰሞኑን በተለይም ባለፉት 8 ቀናት በተደረገው የኦሮሚያ ሚሊሻ የኦሮሚያ ልዩ ኃይል የፌደራል ፖሊስና የመከላከያ ሰራዊት
In the operation made a week ago in Oromia Regional State with the coordination of Oromia Militia, Oromia Special Force, Federal Police and National Defense Force members, huge number of Shene members are destroyed. Some of the places that have been under Shene force is now under the control of the government. Most Shene members surrendered to the government. The use of Oromia and the people have played tremendous role in destroying Shene and its allies. They have shown it is a strong commitment in fighting Shene and its allies not to come to power for the second time.
ወደ ማዕከላዊ መንግስቱ አሸባሪ ህወሓት እንደማይመጣ ያረጋገጠበት ሳምንት ሆኖ ነው የሰነበተው።
Moreover, Laggasa appreciated the response of Ethiopians to the call made by the federal government for the survival campaign. The minister underscored that some Western countries and international organizations did not correctly understand the reality in Ethiopia. Ethiopia firmly believed that the recent US sanction imposed on the leadership of Eritrean military is unjustified. Laggasa underscored that instead of sanctioning the TPLF group, which is the creator of all the problems, the victim has been targeted and this will further worsen the situation rather than bringing peace to the region.
ዋነኛ የሰላም ጠንቅ አሸባሪው ድርጅት መሆኑ ግልጽ ነው።
It is clearly known that the terrorist TPLF group is the main cause of peace and security in Ethiopia. Therefore, Ethiopia believes the sanction of US on the Eritrean government is not appropriate.
ኤርትራ መንግስት ላይ የተጣለው ማዕቀብ ኢትዮጵያ ሰላም ያስገኛል ብላ ስለማታስብ በርግጥም ደግሞ ለሰላም መፍትሄም ነው ብላ ስለማታምን ተገቢ ነው ብላ አታምንም።
Russian ambassador to Ethiopia, Turkey, noted that imposing unilateral sanction and coercive measures on Ethiopia regarding the situation in the country is counterproductive and unacceptable. Let's get more from Ababa Brhane.
According to Ambassador Evgeny Terkin, the imposition of unilateral sanction and coercive measures on Ethiopia is counterproductive that will aggravate the situations. He added that such actions affect the ordinary people and would bring more contradictions and sufferings. The ambassador stressed that such kind of unilateral sanctions are introduced only in a desperate effort to punish the country and the people as a whole. He noted that history has witnessed that Ethiopians have repeatedly affirmed their capability of living in inter-ethnic harmony and they build a common state together, adding that the internal problems of Ethiopia need to be left to Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government and stakeholders who can finally find solution. He stated that he witnessed efforts of Ethiopian government and communities to preserve stability, security and territorial integrity of the country. Ambassador Terkin said, noting that external stakeholders engage in internal affairs of Ethiopia only when they are invited and otherwise it is unacceptable. The ambassador also condemned the irresponsible behavior of international media outlets for spreading fake news regarding the situations in Ethiopia. He urged all international stakeholders that are capable of influencing the situations, including the media, to take a responsible approach to avoid fueling the ongoing strife, as well as to avoid escalating rhetoric and hatred speech. The ambassador pointed out that since the atrocities and violence triggered by TPLF have caused the suffering of ordinary people, increased the number of refugees and internally displaced persons, humanitarian aid should be increased and it must be provided to those in need in close collaboration with authorities of Ethiopia. Ambassador Terkin said Russia will strengthen all spheres of cooperation with Ethiopia and stand alongside Ethiopia and its people. He underscored that Russia is always on the side of Ethiopia and its people and believed that Ethiopia will overcome the present-day situation.
Former Kenyan Parliament Deputy Speaker Farah Malim said TPLF is a long-time mercenary of Westerners used against Pan-African interests in the region. Let's get more from the report. Former Kenyan Parliament Deputy Speaker Farah Malim said the group has brutalized everybody for a long time and does not care for the democratic freedom of its people. He added that the group is the blue-eyed boy of the West, most specifically the U.S.
TPLF has been, for a very long time now, I think since they came to power, the darling of the West, and it's been used against African interests or Pan-African interests in the region. And basically, it was a fascist terrorist organization that brutalized the whole of Ethiopia and all the countries in the neighborhood: Eritrea, Somalia, South Sudan, which is the Sudan Republic.
Malim noted that the Westerners' support for TPLF is not for its democratic ideal, not for good economic governance, not in anything, but because they want to reclaim their old glory so that they could continue to brutalize the Ethiopian people. The former deputy speaker said, adding that, ignoring the facts on the ground, Westerners depict the magnitude that they are trying to create, and they talk about human rights violation when they do not have any evidence. According to him, the American satellite is basically guiding the TPLF terrorist group fighters to go into Amhara and Afar regions. The Kenyan deputy speaker stated they also use the embedded media houses that quickly rally into their own government narratives of any conflict, and this time right now media like CNN, BBC, France 24 and others can be used as propaganda arms. He said that when the fighting was going on at a place far away from Addis Ababa, these media houses were saying that the city has been under siege by the terrorist forces, which was absolute lie, and they wanted to create panic.
The moment the TPLF loses, after carrying out some serious human rights violations in Amhara region or in Afar region, is when they talk about starvation in Tigray, humanitarian, what they call intervention, ceasefire, human rights violations by the by the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. It's absolute nonsense. This is exactly their modus operandi. That is how they operate. They want a regime change, and they're doing everything to make a regime change. And then they want to bring back TPLF into the seat of government in Addis Ababa, and that should never be allowed.
Malim further noted that the Western media paid lip service to the idea of ceasefire when TPLF was on the offensive and talked about services. The Deputy Speaker underlined that the objective of these media campaigns is to bring regime change, which is something Abiy Ahmed's government must never and ever accept. He noted, adding that Ethiopia needs to stand firm to withstand the pressure of the Westerners, the aspiration of more than 100 million people that cannot be dismissed due to a clique of fascists called TPLF. The Charter of United Nations is the founding document of the United Nations. It was signed on the 26th June 1945 in San Francisco and came into force on the 24th of October 1945. Member states of the United Nations are expected to be abided by this charter. Article 2.4 of the charter stated that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. Violating this article of the United Nations Charter, Western nations are trying to intervene in the internal affairs of Ethiopia in different forms. And regarding this, I have Dr. Kalawangel Menala from Bahar Dar University, Political Science and International Relations. Thank you very much for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So the Western forces are trying to intervene in the internal affairs of in Ethiopia in different ways. In some countries they have geopolitical interest, and in some countries they have the interest of establishing a puppet government. So what are the basis of their operation when it comes to Ethiopia?
Well, thank you for having me again. I think it's important to say it out from the very outset that this is international intervention is a highly controversial and a highly debatable issue in political science. There are calls and counter calls for international intervention. It should also be noted that in this case we're talking about unilateral intervention. Interventions are of two types. You have the unilateral intervention of member states of the United Nations, and at times you also have multilateral intervention under the auspices of the United Nations. When it comes to the very basis of unilateral intervention, it's usually made on the basis of the principle of humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. Notably, these kind of interventions are made on the basis of the claim for resolving the conflict, promoting stability, providing humanitarian aid and relief, protecting civilians. These are the kind of excuses that these states often use. But then here we have two issues. One is this kind of interventions often negate, they often negate another international law principle, which is sovereignty of states, the principle of sovereignty and non-interference, and hence it comes as a challenge. This intervention for humanitarian intervention, it comes as a negation, as a challenge to this principle of sovereignty and the non-interference of states. Secondly, these kind of unilateral interventions are often made for geopolitical, calculations, establishing a clientele state, and in some cases even for regime change. So it's often perpetrated under the guise or disguise of humanitarian intervention, but then the real reasons are these geopolitical interests of these states.
So we can say like the operations that's exercising in Ethiopia are unilateral?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Ethiopia, we're talking about unilateral interventions. We haven't so far seen a kind of intervention under the auspices of the United Nations or regional organizations such as African Union or IGAD. It's the pressure coming from Western states, notably from the United States of America.
Similar interventions have been exercising all over the country, in so many countries all over the world. What makes the case of Ethiopia different?
Well, I would say it's largely similar. As I have said, it's based on those principles of humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. So humanitarian relief aid, I mean, they just often come as excuses, as justifications for intervention. So it's largely similar with the kind of interventions which we have seen in the rest of the world. But if it's different, the intervention this time by the United States does not seem to have, taken lessons from past experience of the state. The United States had like several interventions around the world, and so they don't seem to have, taken or learned lessons from that intervention. I also feel like they feel like they don't seem to have gotten the facts with regard to the conflict in Ethiopia. They don't seem to have understood the complexity of the conflict. They don't seem to have understood the history of this country. This country has a long history of shunning and defeating foreign intervention. So they don't seem to have a sense of these complexities. Otherwise, it's largely similar with the kind of intervention.
What about the United Nations Security Council consecutive meetings only about Ethiopia? They conducted like 4 meetings within 2 months about Ethiopia.
Yeah, I mean, these meetings are often, instigated by member states. They had a consecutive meeting over Ethiopia. That's probably one remarkable thing about this intervention. But generally, the United Nations, the intervention there, it's the multilateral intervention I was mentioning, I was referring. If there is any intervention under the auspices of the United Nations, it would be a multilateral one. And we have had these kind of interventions in the past, and they are entirely different from these unilateral interventions. So we need to differentiate between interventions by member states and interventions by unilateral organizations such as the United Nations.
Why do you think the Western countries are affectionate towards TPLF when it's destroying the whole country?
Well, it's again those geopolitical calculations and real policy calculations. When the objective, the real objective of the intervention is regime change, they often instigate a campaign of blackmailing, coercing, and a smearing campaign against the central government, and rewarding and blessing the rebel groups. So this happens usually on the basis of the real political agenda of the intervening state, and it usually it's not even it usually is not limited to the affectionate and applauding of the rebel forces. It also comes in different forms in terms of providing supplies, munitions, weaponry, technology, satellite technology, and things like that. So it's something which even goes beyond affectionate and applauding the rebel forces and blackmailing the central government. It's something which really goes beyond affections. I mean, it usually translates into actions in the form of providing supplies such as ammunition, weaponry, and stuff like that. So this happens on the basis of the real political agenda of the state. When the state believes that the rebels are more likely to advance the interest of the intervening state, they tend to blackmail, coerce, compel the central government, and at the same time by rewarding the rebel forces.
It's obvious that we're talking about politics, and there's always ulterior agendas, ulterior motives of other countries, right? But can they do it without denouncing the federal government of Ethiopia?
No, that doesn't really happen. You either support the federal government, side on the side of the central government, and neglect, the rebel forces, or it could be the opposite, like denouncing the central government in power, the regime in power, and encouraging and supporting the rebels advancing to dismantle the central government.
Okay, my last question is, do you think the intervention, the Western's intervention, can resolve the conflict in Ethiopia? Does it have any contribution?
Well, I think looking at the experience of countries throughout the world, much of the evidence indicates that unilateral interventions often complicate conflicts. These countries, intervening countries, they intervene supporting one or the other group as actors of the conflict. And so the evidence, as we've seen in many countries throughout the world, including our neighbors such as Somalia, unilateral interventions by superpowers, they often complicate the situation, and they contribute in terms of escalating the conflict. So it often comes as a problem, further complicating the security situation of the country. So in many ways, the evidence which we have now indicates that it's more of a complication rather than a solution. But then at the same time, it's also important to mention that it's much better, to engage these partners rather than disengage them, because engagement provides at least two opportunities. One, we can discuss, have a dialogue with these partners, with these allies, and address their legitimate concerns. One, plus the second thing is the dialogue. The engagement process provides us an opportunity for a dialogue, to discuss points of difference and chart, a way out. And so, generally speaking, these unilateral sanctions, interventions, they often are not solutions. But then at the same time, disengaging, avoiding these partners, is not also a solution. So the most important thing to keep in mind would be engaging these allies, having a dialogue and discussion with them, in the hope of resolving, addressing some of their real and legitimate concerns, and then have a discussion, have a deliberation on those points of difference.
Dr. Kalawengel, thank you very much. Is there anything you wanted to add? Because I am already finished with my questions.
That's it. Thank you for having me again.
Dr. Kalawengel Manala from Political Science and International Studies Department in Bahar Dar University. Thank you for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you.
This is all we got for today. I am Fukrati Zodu, and you were watching our Monday update live from Bahar Dar, Ethiopia. Goodbye and have a nice time.